dog from nowhere. Goldie was a honey-colored fox terrier with a bushy tail. He was intelligent, curious, and bubbling over with energy. He came from nowhere and attached himself to Mr. Jones. For 35 years, Mr. Jones had worked in a city office as a clerk. For 35 years, he had worked in the same office, sat at the same one desk, done the same thing day in and day out. When he was 65, he retired and set about realizing his dream. He moved from the city and bought a farm in the countryside. There, he and his wife grew vegetables and looked after their fruit trees and their garden. Mr. Jones went out for long walks like he used to as a boy. The sight of a squirrel cracking a nut or the sound of a flock of birds taking off gave him intense joy. He had everything he wanted but a dog. He craved for a fox terrier, but he couldn't afford to buy one. And then one fine day, Goldie came from nowhere and became his best friend. Goldie belonged to someone else. Mr. Jones knew he should advertise, but kept putting it off.
It's been 3 weeks since Goldie came to us,
Mrs. Jones said to her husband.
Have you made an effort to find the owner?
Mr. Jones felt a little guilty and ashamed. Next day, an ad appeared in the lost and found column of the local paper. A week passed and nobody came to claim the dog. Then, a car bearing an out-of-state license stopped in front of their farmhouse. Mr. Jones was making apple juice and his wife was returning from the orchard with a basket of purple plums. The stranger strode towards them. They noticed that he was tall, a boyish grin lit up his features, and that one coat sleeve hung limp by his side. "I hope you'll forgive my coming unannounced," he said. "I've come to you about..." And he stopped and whistled. "Oh, that's fresh apple juice. It smells delicious." Mr. Jones offered him a glass. He liked it so much that he had 3 more glasses of the juice. As it was afternoon, Mrs. Jones brought homemade food for all of them. The stranger ate it with great relish. After having lunch, he stood up and patted his stomach. "If I stayed with you long, I'd have a big tummy," he said. Mr. Jones looked up at him and asked, "What's your height?" 6'2". "I'm an infantryman. Our son was 6. He was on the ship that sank. I'm sure he left you proud memories," the stranger said softly. "Now I'll explain why I've come. It's about the dog. The dog you advertised." "Oh," said Mr. Jones. "The dog. About 4 weeks ago," resumed the man. "I had a flat tire driving through this part of the countryside. I went to call a mechanic, leaving my dog behind in the car. When I got back, the dog was missing. I looked for him, but..." "What breed was your dog?" asked Mr. Jones in a leaden voice. "A big, honey-colored fox terrier. I would know him instantly, and so would he." It was then that hope died in Mr. Jones's heart. "He's your dog, I'm sure. I'm very curious to know his name. It's bad luck to change a dog's name. Please call him by his name and let him recognize you. He went with a neighbor's boy and any minute now he will be coming back." "Here he comes," said Mr. Jones. "I bet he'll be glad to see you." The dog started quickly towards the tall man, then stopped and looked at Mr. Jones. Standing between the two, he looked from one to the other, a baffled expression on his face. Then he strode towards Mr. Jones and licked his hand. After an awkward silence, the stranger said, "There is a resemblance, a remarkable resemblance, but dogs often look alike. The name will tell. Here, Chief." He called softly. The dog's only response was to whimper and press his face against Mr. Jones's outstretched hand. "Not my dog," said the tall man. He thanked Mr. and Mrs. Jones for their hospitality and left in a hurry. "Fine young fellow," said Mr. Jones. "Wonder why he was in such a hurry." A week passed by and no claimants appeared. "The problem now is to find his real name," Mr. Jones told his wife. The same day, a telegram arrived. It was from a distant city and was unsigned. It said, "Try happy."